Thank you for joining us for another opportunity of fellowship with This Is My Story, testimonies that move the soul.
I just want to say good evening to everyone, where it is still afternoon. Good afternoon to you. I do have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages here, Deborah, and I'm not sure where to start with all this.
But
So
I tell you
why
what,
don't you
I'll navigate it.
read and I will try to respond.
That'll be fine, because there is quite a bit there. And I'll tell you what, we'll start with this. You started your ministry in Florida, is that correct?
No, I started my ministry in Columbia, Sumter, South Carolina, and Augusta, Georgia. It was a
All right.
district of 3 churches.
A district of 3 churches back then, districting. What was a typical experience of pastors, African-American pastors in the South at that time when you became pastor and you entered into the ministry?
It was very exciting. I left Oakwood at age 21. I left in the middle of my senior year because I didn't have enough money to stay to finish. And I was a little ahead of my class because I'd gone to summer school and I had just 9 hours to do. So I finished Oakwood by correspondence school. And I wouldn't have done that, but Clara told me that if I didn't graduate, she wouldn't marry me. So the only reason I finished college was to get married, really. I said, I better hurry up and do this because I was busy working. She was in the senior class that finished in 52, and I should have been in that class, but I left all of my invitations with her and went to Atlanta, where the conference put me up in my first car, and I drove to South Carolina, and I forgot about Oakwood. In fact, I had an attitude about Oakwood because I worked so hard milking cows at 4:30 in the morning and trying to pay my bills. My mother couldn't really help me very much, and they put me out of school one time because I couldn't pay my bills, so I couldn't finish studies. And yeah, I had a hard time at Oakwood. And when I left, I said in my heart, I don't ever want to see that place again. I had a real bad attitude about Oakwood.
And then God gave you an attitude adjustment years later, but before we got there, here you are in the South and you're ministering and you got a district, the first one out the gate, the districting churches?
Yeah, there I was out of Oakwood, not wanting to do anything but pastor and get married. And it was exciting. I was careful what I did and said, and I got stopped once or twice for driving too fast or whatever and speeding around getting to those churches. And I had to be careful what I said to the policeman because even, I knew the danger of the Southern troopers, but the members were wonderful. And I got married about a year after I went to that district, and I had a wonderful association with those churches. Lord blessed in baptisms. And I wouldn't want to have started the ministry any other place than Sumter, Columbia, South Carolina, and Augusta, Georgia.
Well said, very nice. In addition to starting ministry there in the South, what do you believe were your perceptions, having been born in the East, in New York, spending some time in the West as a young man at LAAA Academy, graduating from Pine Forge Academy there in the East, and then finding yourself in the South there, having finished at Oakwood? An interesting perspective and something where a little bit was put perhaps in you in terms of your experiences. How do you think that that may have shaped you for what you would encounter there with districting those churches in a regional conference, or were regional conferences established at that time?
Well, first, I didn't graduate from Pine Forge. I did attend Pine Forge in the 11th grade, but I came back to Los Angeles and I graduated from Los Angeles Academy.
Thank
But
you.
that's a minor thing, but
Thank
I
you.
just want my LA people to know
There you go.
out of both places. Now, I I had been in Alabama. My mother, when I was 7, my mother took my sister and me to Oakwood. She went for a year earning a Bible workers certificate, to earn one. She never really got it. We ran out of money, etc. And she was put out of school. That's another reason I kind of had my mother was put out of Oakwood and for lack of finance, and we were homeless. You didn't ask for all this, but you're tapping the roots now. We were homeless at Oakwood when I was 7. We stayed in an abandoned mill for 2 or 3 weeks, slept on the floor, and had to walk out of there one moonlit night through the cotton fields to get down to where we could get on a bus. I can remember, though I was only 7, and my mother worked as a waitress in Athens, Alabama, where we had some relatives, so she could get enough money to get tickets to go back to New York. So I had some feel for the South from a child, and then I had further feel for the South from my experience at Oakwood when I didn't have any real rough encounters as a student. But when I was leaving Los Angeles, where my mother moved us when I was 11 from New York, to go to Oakwood at age 18, when the bus crossed the Texas line, the driver stopped the bus and came back to where I was sitting in front and demanded that I go to the back of the bus. And I told him, I'm not going to the back. I paid my money like everybody else. And I was the only Black person on the bus. And he opened the door, and it was in the dark. It was getting dark, and we were somewhere in Texas. I don't know where, but it looked forlorn and desolate to me. And he said, if you don't get to the back of this bus, I'm going to call the police. And I saw myself being thrown in jail in a wasted Texas city somewhere. The Lord knew where. So I got to move to the back of the bus. I wish I'd been the first Rosa Parks, but I wasn't going to be thrown in the dark jail in Texas, and I'm not sure she would have done it either, as she did. But to make a long story short, that was my introduction to college. So I knew that there were dangers, and when I went to pastor, I was mature enough to be careful and to try not to cross the lines that would endanger my family or me. And I got along. I mean, there were plenty of people in South Carolina, in the church and out of the church, in Augusta and Sumter, and surely in Augusta, that I had plenty of company, plenty of association, and as a young married couple, we were able to fare quite well and didn't run into any severe problems.
You referenced your mother and her experience, what you recall. Perhaps it would do our listening audience good to hear a couple tidbits about your mother. Who was she? Her feistiness, and she was quite a woman. Explain to us what you recall, and that may, in fact, give insight as to what shaped you and why you have a passion for social justice.
Well, I don't want to bore the audience with a lot about me so much. I can only say that my mother, I was born when my mother was 17. My father was a few years older, and he went back to Barbados, which was his home, before I was 2. So I never knew my father. I never saw my father until I was 34 years of age. My mother reared us, kept us in church school, protected us, provided for us, was an example of courage and industry, working 2 or 3 jobs. She finally earned her college degree, and at age 71, she earned her master's degree. You want to know about my mother? She was 71 when she earned her master's degree at Pepperdine.
Right.
And she was about 70 when she decided to learn how to play golf so she could keep me at her side when I visited her and she could spend more time with me. But that was my mother. She was a champion in every way, and I think that says it.
And I add 2 more parts to that. 2 quick tidbits. Was she not involved and interested in politics?
I didn't get your question.
Was
I'm
she
sorry.
not involved or interested in
Oh,
politics?
Yeah, she ran for office in Los Angeles. She did. She ran for 1 or 2 positions. One I remember very clearly, and she was very, very much socially conscious, conscious of social situations, and she was a staunch protector of the church and involved, very much involved in these debates from the 40s to the 60s to the 90s, debates in whether or not there should be Black conferences on the West Coast. And she was against Black conferences on the West Coast. She felt, as did many people out here, that it wasn't needed, or they aren't needed. And of course, she and I debated that fiercely, but I could not outtalk my mother. So I finally had to, while I didn't agree with some of her positions, I finally had to let it go, because who wants to argue with his mama?
Mm-hmm.
But we had a lot of wonderful conversations, and she contributed.
Yes.
About 3 or 4 years before she died, she gave me a box and said, Calvin, there's some materials in here you might want to see one day. She wanted to leave them with me, knowing that she probably didn't have a long time to live. And I never looked at that box for years, even after she died. It was 3 or 4 years before I looked at the box. But in that box was a treasure trove of documents about race issues and race struggles on the West Coast, particularly as dealt with whether or not we should have Black conferences out here. And those materials and those letters are in the book. So please, I'm not trying to sell the book, but if you want to know about her personality, I do deal with that somewhat in the book, and her position on social issues, including political matters in the community. During World War II, she joined not the WACs, but one of those groups of women who were supporting troops by doing certain things in the community. She was that. And one day, if I am bold enough and have time, I need to write a book about my dear mother.
You brought up something, and thank you for sharing some of those little highlights about her. I think it's significant because it helped shape some of what you stand for. What were your observations of the West and its experiences in terms of race versus the South with its plantations and its history of slavery, and the West known for those coming to look for gold, and quite a different experience, which seems to lend itself to the conversation of regional conferences and no regional conference. What's your observation about that?
Well, I think that Adventists in the West who were born here and who were leaders here at the time that the subject of regional conferences were broached in a more public way in the middle 40s, because they did not, first place, there weren't that many Adventists. There were only about 1,800 Seventh-day Adventists and maybe 4 or 5 churches on the whole West Coast. 1 or 2 in Berkeley area, Berkeley, California area, 1 in Los Angeles, and 1 or so down around San Diego. That was it. And a little company maybe in around Phoenix. There were no substantive congregations. So it just didn't seem to be needed. And by the time that Black conferences became very strong and the move became an issue out here in the 60s and later 70s, and certainly in the 90s, when they had that big survey and 46% of Blacks out here said no to Black conferences, and 54% said yes. It wasn't that overwhelming, the vote, but 46 said no. And that reflected those who were born here, who had never had the social trauma of many Blacks in the South and East and North, and the Blacks who had moved here, who wanted to get away from social trauma. And I respect that. And I think that it's working very well in what we now have out here, which is a system of coordinators. We don't have presidents, but each conference has a Black coordinator. And the coordinator interfaces between the Black churches and the conference committee, and is a member of the conference committee, and in some cases is an officer of the conference. So the person has a lot of clout, doesn't have the final administrative clout that a president has, but still is close to that. And we have Black presidents out here. There's one right now in Northern California, Mark Woodson. And we had one here in Nevada, Utah, Elder Brown, who's now moved to the Union. So, and we've had other Black presidents. So it's not exclusively non-presidential in that regard.
Understood. So having mentioned the regional conferences and some of the particulars about them, could you give us perhaps a 2-minute response of some of the highlights or success stories of regional conferences for those who may not know the regional work, some of their staples and what they've done well?
Well, of course, the advantages for a regional conference of regional conferences are many, and this is no negative on the coordinator system we have here.
Surely.
But it is a statement of why regional conferences are deemed to be so successful. Number one, where you have regional conferences, the employment of Blacks is demonstrably greater. Regional conferences allow opportunities for employment that you don't get in terms of numbers where you don't have them. Regional conferences also allow for more training of Blacks, for more preparation of Blacks to go to the union and to the division and to the general conference. Very few individuals in the division and the general conference have come from other than regional conference preparation. That's where they get the opportunity. There's more opportunity for training in these places. But most of all, regional conferences provide an indigenous leadership for Black mission. And that's really what the church is all about, mission. And you can always figure the ultimate production from indigenous rather than alien leadership. Alien leadership in any community is obviously not going to be as productive as indigenous leadership. And Black conferences provide that, and that has something to say about increase of numbers and finance in particular, but numbers most of all, because that's what it's all about.
Very good. So you started in the South there, which included Georgia, and then eventually you found yourself having to pastor in Detroit. What was the experience of a pastor prior within the Seventh-day Adventist Church and its counterparts, the Caucasian counterparts and Spanish and those other individuals who are part of now a growing church prior to the assassination of Dr. King?
Your question is, what was the
Experience of a pastor such as yourself and other individuals in ministry who may have been Caucasian and other ethnicities? What was the experience? Did you have meetings together? Did you encounter each other in the conference?
I see, I see.
Before
No,
separate but equal?
there wasn't much of that at all. There was very little association between white and Black pastors in communities. It's pretty much like it is now. There's very little now. I live in a city where I attend the white churches when I get ready to do so. I like to do that. But when I pastored here, we did have a pastors guild in Las Vegas when I pastored here, and I've been a part of one or two in some other cities where the Black pastors and the ministers met once a month, and that was nice. And maybe we go out to eat somewhere, but there was no association between the memberships. I do remember some very fine fellowship with other pastors, but the churches very rarely did anything together. Once in a while, there might be an evangelistic meeting where a high-powered evangelist would come to town and all the churches, Black and white, would participate. But other than that, I can't think of much else that happened at the membership level, but some very nice things, yes, at the level of leadership, church leadership.
So now Dr. King is assassinated, and you had mentioned some months back about your participation when you shared, not months back, actually earlier this year, of your time out there marching and wanting to see the riots and having that time where you shared with the elder. What was the stance of our church, world church, and other fellow pastors who did not look like you? Did we as a congregation have their support at a time of civil rights? Did you as a pastor feel support from our world church? What was that like? What did that feel like?
The church, the general church, the church in general was not involved. The church has always functioned with the motif that encourages therapeutic cures for social ills and not preventive. So we have only recently begun to think about protests against evil rather than just helping the people who have been wounded by evil. There's a big difference between giving blankets and soup and sandwiches and housing and clothing to people who have been wounded by injustice. in American society or any society, and doing something about preventing evil, as did Jesus, who railed against the Pharisees because of what they were doing to the um, to the locals, shall I say. And this brings me to the question that I have here. It says, hello, Deborah. My questions are set below. And it ties right into this one that she is sending to me through
Yes,
you.
yes, yes.
The government under which Jesus lived was corrupt and oppressive. On every hand were crying abuses, extortion, intolerance. This is quoting Ellen White on page 509. Yet the Savior attempted no civil reforms. He was our example. He kept aloof from earthly governments. Since Jesus attempted no civil reforms, since Christ is our example, are we not following Christ's example when we attempt to reform abuses, intolerance, and grinding, in cruelty, police disparate treatment of blacks, and so forth? The answer is that Jesus pushed the envelope as far as his society, his totalitarian society of Roman cruelty allowed. Because Ellen White reminds us that Jesus attempted no social reforms, does not say we should attempt no social reforms. We should try the principles of reform that Jesus pushed as far as his day allowed, as far as we can in our day. And let me illustrate. The Apostle Paul said in the book of Philemon that Onesimus must go back to his owner and be a good slave. Ellen White said in her writings that we should not obey the slave law, the fugitive slave law. And even at the risk and the cost of civil disobedience and its punishment, if you found a runaway slave, don't return him. Now, the question is, who was right? The Apostle Paul, who said, be a good slave, or Ellen White, who said, if you find him, don't return him, like Paul said you should do. And even if you're going to be punished by the government, they're both right. Paul did the best he could do in his day, and it was unthinkable even to be a good slave. He was using language that people couldn't imagine. How could you be a good and a brother slave, as he told Onesimus to be? But Ellen White went even further. She said, no, you don't go back to be good anything. You get him out and house him. And even if you are punished to do so, you do so. So Jesus didn't rail against the government, but he sure railed against those Pharisees who were treating people wrong. He picked up a whip and he turned over their tables, and he acted like he wanted to whip up on somebody's head with a whip.
That's right.
That was Jesus. He had righteous indignation.
Yeah.
And that's what we ought to be looking at, not the fact that he didn't go out and protest against Romans and be hanged before his time. It wasn't his time. He had to fulfill his mission, which he did. And so he didn't rail against Rome, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't rail against evil. And most of the evil that we see today is in private institutions. And Jesus certainly railed against them.
Absolutely. I appreciate.
What other questions do you have?
I appreciate that landscape that you provided. Lesson 4 of the Social Justice Quarterly references Southern work. In that body of work, Ellen White refers to Black people as deprived, ignorant, downtrodden, idolatrous, and heathen. She said that colored people had darkened minds and compared the worship of Black people with white people as ignorant versus intelligence. My question, and she goes on, Southern Work was written almost 20 years after Reconstruction ended in the South. We formed our own churches as early as 1787 with AME Church and AME in Zion in 1821. Furthermore, there were a number of Black churches in the South after the Civil War. We as a people were not without a knowledge of God. My question is this: how do I, a Black woman, says Sandra White, reconcile these racist descriptions of Black people with Ellen White's stance on social justice?
Thank you. Good question. Good question. Number one, Ellen White did not write Southern Work. Southern Work cannot be looked at as a book that she wrote. Ellen White is a collection of quotes that she wrote. So technically, it should be remembered that she didn't sit down and write a book and said the name of it is Southern Work. Southern Work is a collection of her quotes that were brought together in what was it, like 1970s sometime or 1980s. So this is not a book she wrote. And these quotes that you are talking about or referencing were her statements written in if I remember correctly, 1860s, 1850s, 1860s, 1870s, and maybe even 1890s across a broad spectrum of time. It is true that slavery not only denied Blacks of education, but slavery encouraged animalistic propensities and ideas. It is true that Richard Allen, who started the AMEZ Church, was an educated man, and there were educated Blacks, but Richard Allen was not in the South. He was not in Mississippi. He was born in Philadelphia, and the AME Church was started in Philadelphia. There were a few educated, erudite Blacks in the country, but they weren't on the slave farms. These people were uneducated. They were treated like animals. They were mated like animals. Their sexual lives were forced upon them so that if a man were strong and broad and had muscles, he was made to be like a stud, to do nothing but have babies. They were treated like animals. They were ignorant. Ellen White wasn't talking about Richard Allen and the freed slaves in the North. She was talking about the poor, hapless, hopeless slaves who lived in cabins, who ate from troughs like cows and pigs, who ate the slop from master's house, who were whipped and beaten and denied, and who lived without hope for 14 generations. They were born, they weren't treated like subjects, they were objects. They were just the property of their masters. They were barefoot and tattered and unlettered and lived in a society that was animalistic, and that is true of the average slave in the South. And it was only after they were freed that they were able to begin to think about going to school, and the schooling was provided to them, and that the gospel of Jesus Christ was provided to them. The earliest gospel for the slaves in the South, not talking about Richard Allen and AMEZ in the North, not talking about freed slaves, but in the South, where they were subjected and treated like hogs and pigs, The earliest they heard about Jesus was in the 1600s from the Quakers, from the Quakers who would bring them to their homes and try to teach them how to read. They didn't even know English. They spoke different languages and they came from different parts of Africa. So they had different accents and different languages. They didn't even understand each other. And all they did was work and have babies and work and have babies so the master could have more hands to pick cotton. They were denied and they were depressed and they did not have a life that you and I enjoy because they were under the heel of oppression. They were castrated. If he tried to run away, they'd bring him back and castrate him. Castrate the poor brother who had to holler and scream in pain in the woods. And hardy women were made strictly for babies, and that's all. So don't try to compare freed slaves up north with what our poor forefathers and mothers went through in those cabins in the South. It was terrible. It robbed them of their humanity. And they were just what Ellen White called them, as she described them, and you have quoted her correctly.
It's sobering to hear you share reflections about that. I believe Dr. Darrell White, are you on, Dr. White?
And while you're getting him, let me say the other part of the question, Ellen White saw this.
Yes.
And she was very, very concerned. Southern Work has all these statements where she's damning slavery. She damns slavery over and over again. She was very, very blunt about slavery, and even in the recovery stages from 1865 to 1896, when Separate but Equal was established, Ellen White, and not only Ellen White, but the other early pioneers, Fitch and Uriah Smith and all these other early Adventists, they condemned slavery and they condemned what went on in Reconstruction. But it was after Separate but Equal was established in 1896 that the church decided that it was better, and Ellen White says it, volume 9, let blacks work for the blacks and whites for the whites until the Lord shows us a better way. Problem is, our white Adventists never got to the better way until 1965, when they finally came out and agreed with the end of Separate but Equal, which the nation annulled in 1954. It took us another 12 years almost to finally agree with Separate but Equal. But all that time, we were struggling as a people under Separate but Equal from 1896. Ellen White died in 1915, but until she died, she was boldly stating her hatred for discrimination and her support for equality. And she finally said, when she saw what was happening with Separate but Equal, after her bold stance in the 40s, 1840s, with her first vision, and 1850s, 1842, her first vision, all through 1850s, all through 1860s, 70s, all through 1880s, all through 1890s, all through 1890s, until 1901, when she said, well, it's too much. This nation is too divided on the Separate but Equal. We really can't force white people together with black people in this nation. So let black people work for themselves until the Lord shows us a better way.
Thank you so much for that. Dr. White, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Would you mind asking the written question that you provided? It has a lot of moving parts, and I think your expression of it Your first question I have concerns two statements and the desire of ages. Would you mind sharing that with Dr. Rock at this time?
Well, I thought he spoke to that already.
I'm sorry, your second question.
Oh, well, let's see. You talked about number 4 with all the subparts to it?
Yes.
Okay, so on February, when you look at the Social Justice Adult Bible Study Guide, hold on for a minute. I have 2 devices here. I'm gonna have to cancel one out. All right.
Social justice in the Word of God refers to gospel workers, pages 391 through 396.
Yeah, 391 to 396. So I had about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 subparts or questions relating to the information that was shared from pages 391 to 396. And then, you know, I anticipated that all those questions would not be asked. So for number 5, what I did was I tried to summarize it, what my concerns were. But actually, what I want to do is there is one of those subparts that I really wanted to address. And that is my 4C. And I'll read that and then I'll do my summary. So this is what the gospel workers writing states. It says this, quote, it says, "Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers." And then it goes, you know, there's more information that is stated with regards to that topic. And my question is this, when she says, "Be ye not," and by the way, I also said this, I said, my questions are not advocating a particular position. They're just questions. So I'm not advocating one way or another, but these questions, they're just questions that I have in my mind. So with regards to her statement about "be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers," I have to go back and look at the other part, but she's talking about politics and all of this, okay? My question was this, does that have any bearing at all on Seventh-day Adventists joining up with organizations such as the NAACP, such as National Action Network, to advocate for political issues that include but are not limited to social justice matters?
Thank you, Dr. White. I appreciate that.
That's a great question. And the answer is no, it does not preclude our association. In fact, in the book Education and the book Messages to Young People, you will find statements where Ellen White says that she promotes, she says, "I see young men rising and studying who will one day stand in legislative halls and help to enact laws of the land." In more than one place, she promotes, she actually applauds participation in government. And of course, without Ellen White, we know what happened with Joseph and Daniel in the Bible and Esther. And we have plenty of examples of God being active in government. And Ellen White, of course, with her statements, actually parallels that. And her concern, as I read her concerns, not only in this realm or statement that you have mentioned, but more broadly, her position is that we should not become indelibly tied to a party, so we vote the party right or wrong. We should be more concerned with the individual's character and the individual's principles, and with the thrust of any proposals. So when I go to vote, I shouldn't just go, although it's very tempting, and I have done it in a hurry and shouldn't have, no doubt, but in a hurry, you just vote, I'm a Democrat. I'll just vote Democrat, 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 Democrat. And that's not the better way to do it. We should study the proposal and make sure we're voting the right thing. And she even encourages us to vote. Ellen White says we should vote for temperance. We should vote for women's suffrage. Ellen White was all about participation in social good And she in no wise discourages that. What she discourages is blind and unvetted or vetted, unvetted acceptance of everything a party or person presents, and making sure that what we're supporting is righteousness and not individual creed or individual drive for power and individual greed that we see in society today. So no, she does, her position, and you have to look at her total statement, not just one or two narrow sentences or paragraphs, but her position throughout is be careful what you do, but praise God when we have people in position where they can, in fact, affect good for the betterment of society.
Can I just follow up and just read some of these other statements that are on those pages that raise concern for me? Can I read some?
Absolutely.
Okay, so once again, it's Gospel Workers, pages 391 to 396. She says this, quote, "Those who teach the Bible," and I have an ellipsis here, "are not at liberty to unite in making apparent their prejudices for or against political men or measures." Okay, then I have an ellipsis after that. Then she has another statement in those pages, "The Lord would have his people bury political questions." And she's got another statement, "We cannot with safety take part in any political scheme." She has another statement, "God employs the strongest figures to show that there should be no union between worldly parties and those who are seeking the righteousness of Christ. Every teacher, minister, or leader in our ranks who is stirred with a desire to ventilate his opinions on political questions should be converted by a belief in truth or give up his work. Those who stand as educators, as ministers, as laborers together with God in any line have no battles to fight in the political world. God does not call upon us to enlarge our influence by mingling with society, by linking up with men on political questions. They are not to spend their time talking politics or acting politics. God's children are to separate themselves from politics. Do not take part in political strife." And on this one, I had a question of, I won't even go into that one. "The Christian life must not be united with politics." So those are some statements that you will find on those pages from pages 391 to 396 in Gospel Workers.
Yes, but you have to read beyond Gospel Workers to get her view on politics. And as I've said, when you have the danger of interpreting Ellen White is reading a few statements and not being acquainted with her full advice on the situation or on that issue. And as I've said, Ellen White clearly says she was thrilled about young people who are training to go into legislative bodies. She was thrilled about and advocated voting, and in a way, even boycotting liquor stores and other things. She wanted us to be careful. She wanted the people in her day to be very careful about with whom they associated and getting mixed up, what she calls in one place, getting mixed up in political schemes. And that makes all the sense in the world, but that does not say that what we do in social justice is politics. Everything that is political is social, but not everything that is social is political. And remember, God made government. God established two forms on this earth for the good of his people. One is the religious, and that's the church, and the other is government. And when you read Romans, you realize that government is an establishment from God. God put it there. and we should support it, and we should help it be what we know it should be, and we need to protest against it, as did Jesus. Jesus called Herod an old fox in Luke. He called him an old fox, and he commented on him, and he, as a leader in his community, by his principles and his government, he outfoxed the Romans. So Jesus was not oblivious, and Ellen White was not oblivious. And those quotes that you read are all true. No minister should be wrapped up in politics. And by wrapped up and by caught up, and that's what she's saying, every adjective you've read has to do with people being immersed and enamored and wrapped up. But that does not obviate being associated with the NAACP, paying your dues, being involved in Black Lives Matter, running for government, and becoming a senator, as we have with our dear lady from Texas, who is right there, and I see her every time something big happens. We should be proud and understand that we have an obligation to society, that Ellen White's comments about not getting dragged down in associations with politicians or immersed, and her meaning is being overcome, so it detracts from what we're supposed to be doing in the spiritual realm, as meaning that we are hands off, and we Seventh-day Adventists should draw apart from seeing to it that government is run appropriately. And I'll be happy to send you those other quotes. I don't have them available here at the computer right now, but I'll be happy to send you the quotes from the Book of Education and the other quotes to which I refer, where Ellen White is not only neutral, but she is positive. She is positive to our engagement in government.
Thank you very much. And I'm familiar with some of those quotes where she talks about young people being in the legislative halls. I'm familiar with that quote. Thank you for your response.
And you got to be in a party. You have to be in a party. Well, you could be independent, but even that's an independent party. You can't get in the legislative position without running, and you have to run as a Republican in this country, or a Democrat, or an independent. Well, I guess they did have a Green Party or something like that, but you got to have a party. You got to have a party, and that's politics. Politics is, remember, Dr. White, politics is the means by which government is run, and there's nothing, government has to be run. So we got to have politics. What's happened is it's become a dirty word because so many people have abused it. But politics properly engaged is a noble and a worthy endeavor. And that's the way I read Ellen White in her total counsel on this matter, not just the narrow statements where she's trying to warn us to stay out of trouble.
Right. And then just once again, this came out of the Adult Bible Study Guide for February 22nd, 2022. It's referenced there. It's not my reference. It's referenced there in that publication. So thank you very much for your response.
You're fine. And I'm glad you got that quarterly, and glad you referred to it. I can advertise it and tell you that even if you didn't get one when Black History Month was on, you can get one now. You can get one now, and we can stay connected, sir. And I have something I've written on that I'll be glad to share with you. So do I have his email on?
I'll send it. Yes, I'll send it to you so that you have it. Dr. Rock, I think you were referring to Sheila Jackson Lee.
Oh, yes.
Momentarily ago, when you referenced Texas and your agreement with her effectiveness in her position and serving there in the Senate. I believe she's also served in other areas that have helped in terms of our academic institution there at Oakwood. Uh, any other responses, any other questions in reference to that? The one question that was sent in to you also, Dr. Rock, separate but equal. We've seen the church, the African American church separate. They have had their establishment of the regional conferences and their academies and so forth. Has that been a backlash in any way for us as a world church when women were working toward trying to get their right to vote, and you're trying to have people come together in other areas, and the church may have been promoting something else? Has that dominoed a different way for us as members within the Seventh-day Adventist Church?
Well, separate but equal was established in 1896. And from 1896 to 1954, the government legally prevented Blacks from having the same rights and public privileges as white Americans. Separate but equal said you had to sit in the back. Separate but equal said you had to drink from another fountain, go to another restroom, couldn't stay in the same hotel, couldn't be treated in the hospital, couldn't be hired. Separate but equal said that you are a second-class citizen without the privileges of the white America. And the church was afraid to stand up against separate but equal. The church functioned under that umbrella from 1896 to 1954. The church said it is expedient that we obey the government. So you can't come to our schools, you can't come to our hospitals, you can't be members of our churches, you can't be hired in our conferences. You are separate but equal. But of course, we weren't equal because we didn't have the institutions, we didn't have the money. And one of the reasons we got Black conferences is that we were separate but unequal, and we needed a vehicle for mission. And that's one of the reasons the Black conferences were established in 1944 and 45, which was right near the end of separate but equal. But then for the next 10, 12 years, even though the nation said separate but equal was annulled and you could sit anywhere and no more different water fountains, etc. Of course, a lot of people didn't obey that. I mean, they were still functioning like it was separate but equal. You know, in 1954, the church said it's over, but the next day, you didn't find white folk accepting Black people. It took years, and still a problem some places, but it took years for that separate but equal law to fade in the thinking of the citizenry. In fact, the older people some of them never got rid of it. And it took their children, the next generation and the generation after that, to get over it. And America is still not over separate but equal. But things are much better. We can go where we want, even in Mississippi. We can go to any restaurant, sleep at any hotel. And you know, what we have in society and the church is not a segregated society or a segregated church. The church is not segregated. The church is desegregated. You can join any congregation, go to any hospital, etc., go to any school. The problem is that there are people in these places who are segregationists. There are evil people in the government and in the church unfortunately, who make things difficult in certain instances. And that's going to happen till the Lord comes. Ellen White says in the book Southern Work that the racial issue is a severe problem. And she said, I think that it will be until the Lord comes. And unfortunately, the devil has some evil-minded people in the church. So we shouldn't be, we can't let that throw us. That's not the Adventist church. That's some individuals.
Very good. Is there, after having now had the study guide, what have you heard or what have you observed that has surprised you the most since this study guide has now circulated? Is there any observation of us as an African-American membership in the church that has left you befuddled, wondering, could that be? Any experiences or aha moments since the release of the study guide that has caught your attention?
I have no particular reaction in that manner, Deborah. I am very, very happy that it has caught fire, so to speak. I'm saddened that there are many people who never got it or who haven't gotten it yet. I hope it'll still be available, or they'll get a chance to get it. But I'm happy when I see my people's eyes open, because we have drunk the Kool-Aid of social conservatism, of staying away from social justice, of waiting till the Lord comes, or thinking it's dirty politics. And we have been taught that that's the way the Bible has been interpreted, because we haven't had scholars to go to the Bible and learn the Greek and the Hebrew. I know 2 or 3 blacks who can read Greek and Hebrew. I mean, read it like a scholar can. Very few. It takes about 7 or 10 years of graduate study in a seminary to be truly proficient, to get degrees in New Testament and Old Testament and systematic theology. And we haven't had blacks to do that. We've had wonderful preachers, world beaters in preaching and evangelism, where we've had very few scholars. I'm not one who can read the Greek and Hebrew. I wish I could, but these people read it and then they tell us what God said. What we have been doing is reading the English that the white advantage says what God said. This white brother or sister who comes from an advantaged class, who doesn't know anything about a history of slavery in their background. The children of the slave owners have read the books through the eyes of their parents, largely, and they tell us what Jesus meant and what Paul meant. But we haven't had people who come up from slavery to read the Hebrew and the Greek and tell us what God, and that's entirely different. They share the information from different prisms, different points of view. So this study guide is an attempt, and it was written by 4 people that we chose, Dr. Warren and I, who had this idea. We didn't write it. We helped to write some things, but it was their creation for which we asked. And I'm just glad. I'm thrilled to see so many people have what you call the aha moment, because they're able to see that it's not wrong to protest. It's not wrong to boycott. That if we can boycott liquor stores, we ought to boycott police brutality. That if we can boycott the wrong houses of ill repute, we can boycott institutions, banks, and other operations that don't hire Black people, and we give all of our money thereby leaves our community, and we never benefit. There are a lot of people who have read this quarterly, and their eyes have been opened because they've wondered about these things, but they've never been taught. And I am thoroughly, I can't tell you how pleased I am when people tell me, I once was blind, but now I see. And I'm glad that this is helping in that regard.
Well, it's just about time to close. And I thank you for sharing that response of what you have seen take place. Where can we as a membership strengthen our stance, African American membership within the Seventh-day Adventist Church, within our communities? Where can we, in your opinion, strengthen our posture, or strengthen what is perceived by them as a perception of us, our legacy, or even our future? What would be your response to that? Your experiences through all of these different seasons you've observed where you have served, what wisdom might you lend in that regard?
You see if I can understand your question. Where can we improve our image as Black Seventh-day Adventists?
Yes, our posture in the church, their perception of us, our legacy, and what our future may be.
Oh, those are three different questions. Okay, let's go with our posture. I think our posture is taking a beating right now.
Mhm.
I think our posture is taking a beating because of the extremes to which some congregations are going in terms of worship in both music and preaching. I think that we are losing, not only in the white community, but we're losing a lot of erudite, educated, accomplished Blacks, young Blacks in particular, to white churches and state conferences because of what's going on in our churches. That we've gone overboard with so-called gospel music, the instrumental music, as well as the vocal music, that there's too much bodily exercise and performance and hollering and repetition, and that there are a lot of our erudite Blacks who say, later for that, I'm going to go over here where I can sit down, where church service ends at noon, and I can go home with my family, and I don't have to have my ears assaulted with the volume of music in a lot of these churches. And I myself have had to sit down and hold my fingers in my ears because maybe it's because of my old age and my ears are getting feeble, but I've had to sit down and put my fingers in my ears while the saints were carrying on. And that's bad. That's bad. And frankly, I think that it hurts us. And I'm embarrassed that some of that is actually on YouTube and people can see it. People can see our young men singing and grabbing clutching their thighs while they sing like they're on stage somewhere. And praise teams where people are not coordinated in dress, and the big thing is to holler and prance. It is embarrassing to me, and I know it's embarrassing to a lot of Black people, many of whom are leaving Black churches and taking their money with them to state churches. So if you ask me about our posture, I think, and I don't know that it'll ever improve, I hope it does, but I think that that's hurting our posture. And if we could stop that, now if we want to do that down Saturday night or some other time, that's one thing. But at 11 o'clock at worshiping the King of the universe, I think it's outrageous and I think it's hurting us. So we could improve our posture if we didn't act like Babylon and found ways to be the Seventh-day Adventist Church with a worship style that is consistent with the dignity of the message and the dignity of the God we serve. And I don't think we can come in his face doing what we do so often in our churches. That's one thing. Now, what's the next question you have? You said
I can't help
posture
but
and our what?
posture, perception, their perception of us, and you kind of did a crossover with that, but our legacy. How can
legacy.
we impact our legacy?
Well, we can
Improve it maybe is a better way to say it.
well, we can improve our legacy, and I guess when you say legacy, you're talking about the way we leave. You're talking about people dying. When you talk legacy, you're saying somebody died and left an impression, and the generations die. There's a legacy left by the Clevelands, by the E.E. Clevelands and the Harold Clevelands and the C.D. Brooks and the Charles Bradfords, and these names. Every generation goes, and those generations left us wonderful legacies of increase in churches, of great evangelists that were among us. And that's not only on the East Coast, but also on the West. George Rainey. These people left wonderful legacies. Major White on the West Coast, the Canson family. What can we do? I don't think we can improve on it except to continue it and to try to do our best to keep building. And I named a lot of men, but of course, there are a lot of women involved too. Dr. Temple out here, Dr. Kimbrough, and all these women who helped to produce the platform on which we stand. Dr. Dykes, whose name I've mentioned before, it's a wonderful legacy we have. And I don't think we can ruin it, but we will be derelict if we don't continue it and do our best if time should last. And we die, and we will, if time should last, that we make sure that it's not derogated, it's not ruined, but it is increased in terms of production and size. And as we get more ways to minister, that our mission more and more is garnished, polished, and finally completed by the time the Lord comes.
Absolutely. There was a remark that was put in the chat saying, should our worship style be Eurocentric? I couldn't help but think about something that Elder Bradford said. Uncle Charles, he said he was tired. What did he refer to them as, Uncle Calvin? 7-Eleven songs.
Oh, yeah. Well,
7-Eleven songs. He said it's 7 words. 7 words. Okay.
No Eurocentric. No, we don't need to be Eurocentric, but we don't have to be heathenistic either. We don't have to be Eurocentric. I've traveled all over Africa. People say this is African. No, I traveled all over Africa, lived in Africa for months, lived in and visited 15 or so countries, and never see what I see on stage in Black Adventist churches today. We don't have to go to extremes. We can have our own culture. They're wonderful gospel songs. Wonderful. We don't have to sing a bunch of anthems and cantatas. We can sing hymns and we can sing gospel songs. We can sing, we can be enthusiastic. But we don't have to bombard people's eardrums. We don't have to have hats on. People sitting up at the 11 o'clock hour in a band with the hat on, like they're at some nightclub. Folk, is wrong.
Have mercy.
It's wrong.
Have mercy. Have mercy.
We're worshiping God. Playing the drums so loudly, you got to have a shield up there to protect some of the sound. I know you don't have to be you don't have to sit there and have Eurocentric music. You can have black music. Black music was here long before this stuff started.
I was going to mention, and I thank you for that passionate response. I was going to mention Uncle Charles, and you know it, 7-11 songs, 7 words that are repeated 11 times over and over again. We used to talk about that and laugh, but I also have to share this. It hasn't been too long when Jerry and I went to one of our churches here, and the grandmother had some earmuffs, remember that? And the earmuffs were for the baby. To put on the baby, so when the praise team sang, the baby wouldn't start hollering and the baby's ears would be protected. I'm laughing, but it was kind of humorous. And then I had to laugh about 3 weeks ago because I saw Jerry do it like you in church. So it's not just you.
Yeah. But when it comes to the 7-11, where you repeat it over and over again,
yes,
7 words 11 times. Remember, in the Messiah, there's 7-11. Hallelujah,
there
hallelujah.
You go. There it is.
So it's not just what you repeat. That's not the big issue. Not the big issue. It's the message plus the bodily involvement, and as the Apostle Paul says, bodily exercise profited little in worship anyway. And we had to be careful. And in the Messiah, we have a repetition, and that's okay. But God, when we go to church, we don't go to impress each other. We go to impress God. And the angels who go before him fold their wings and bow in reverence. And if we have a proper vision of who God is in worship, we'll be joyful. We'll be joyful, but we won't go around saying, well, Miriam danced and all that, you know, she danced, you'd be dancing too if you came out of the Red Sea. Everybody would dance, but that's not that. We're not talking about worship, 11 o'clock hour, and make a loud noise. Reading text and say, make a loud noise before the Lord. Beat your cymbals. Yes, there's a place for all of that, but there are types of worship, and 11 o'clock is not where we have to impress God with what we're doing. In my opinion, and hey, I'm 91, I'll be 92 in July, so, you know, yeah, I'm talking from a point of view that may not, that you may have to think very carefully, that you don't need to listen, because I'm just an old dude looking back, but I tell you the way I think and the way I understand.
And that's okay. One of your
Amen.
favorite songs is actually by a popular group, Mary Mary. I cried my last tear yesterday.
Oh, I love that song.
That's right. So you
That's
were
not
in that.
Eurocentric. That's not Eurocentric. And I
No.
have a whole lot of others. I have a whole lot of others that I can name that I love, that are fine, wonderful gospel songs and singing. But that's not the point. And it's not what I think. but you asked me the question. That's the answer.
Absolutely,
Any other questions?
absolutely. Absolutely. We're going to end with this. You've been very generous with your time. So many individuals think that the time has come, or there's been arguments through the years that the time has come where Black conferences should be eliminated. They're no longer effective. And while I don't necessarily want to elaborate on that, could you speak to the importance of maintaining those areas or those organizations that are specifically for African Americans, NAACP and UNCF and the purpose they serve, along with our regional conferences?
Well, you're drawing a fine parallel. Every minority in a larger pool of humanity needs to have an individual vehicle to promote, protect, and advance their culture, their ideas. I don't care who it is. If it's a minority that's in a great expansion, a minority in a great expansion of majority persons, the minority has to caucus, and the minority has to deal with its indigenous needs. So we need them because mission demands indigenous leadership. A pastor is not only the leader of the congregation where he or she is assigned, but a pastor is to serve the entire community. Everybody in the community ought to know the pastor. The pastor ought to be out there trying to evangelize and comfort in cases of distress and accident. The pastor is a savior type for the whole community. And if you put me into a Chinese community, I could try, but I could never be like a Chinese pastor. If you threw me into some strange community, I couldn't be as effective as I could in the communities where I was born. And that's the issue. So if you're going to put Black leadership in Black communities, that Black leadership needs counsel and guidance for the effectiveness of mission. That's what it's all about, mission. And what the Black conferences are providing is that effectiveness that is not there or could not be there. The church that I pastor here in Las Vegas is in a community where white people, the policemen don't even want to come in there sometimes. The police don't like to come in there. And I've seen them in there with their shotguns trained on people's homes. It's a community where you got to know what it means to have those shoes hanging on a wire. You got to know the sounds of the jungle. You got to look at people and be aware of who they are. And you put somebody who's alien in there, they don't know what they're looking at. They don't know what they're hearing. Black leadership is needed. And that's why you have what we call these counselors and coordinators on the West Coast. They're not presidents, but they have Black secretaries, they have Black budgets, they have Black camp meetings, they have Black workers meetings, they have Black everything. And they're just like a Black conference, except the coordinator doesn't have the automatic administrative authority. But you got to have something. So the something we have in the rest of the country is serving well, leave it alone. The something we have out here is doing fine. And I think it's just great. So we'll march toward the kingdom and do the best we can as a minority in this world. We're only 2%, Black Seventh-day Adventists are 2% of the world membership, just 2%. We're 30% in America, but 2% in the world. So we need what we got.
Dr. Rock, there is one more quick question that's been put here, and I'm going to end with this. And Viola, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to pray for our guest right after this. It says, Dr. Rock, can you share what a successful merging of a Black church with a white or Spanish congregation might look like. And that comes from Bertha Tutt.
Yeah, it would look like what's happening in the Atlantic Union. The Atlantic Union used to be all white, just about. I don't mean Atlantic Union. I mean the Greater New York Conference in the Atlantic Union. And the Atlantic Union used to be almost all white, yeah. But now it's 80% black. And what happened? White folk moved out, black folk just moved in. And when you say a successful merger, it would be where most white folk stay and the merger occurs. But tell me where that's happening. Tell me anywhere in America you know of where a large number of blacks moved in and most of the white folks stayed in that congregation. It doesn't happen. They have an appreciation for a different kind of worship. And I can't blame them. We call it white flight. But I can't blame them from fleeing from some of the things I see. I flee myself. But beyond that, they have what they call white flight, which means that their culture leads them to want to worship like they appreciate. This is a long answer, but I was preaching at a certain camp meeting, and I thought I was doing pretty well, preaching like a black preacher. And when I got through, people, that was a good sermon, elder, thank you, come again. And a little freckle-faced white girl looked at me and said, Pastor, why do you holler so much? She was telling the truth of how they felt about my preaching. But that's the way it is. We have a different style. And my tone would not have been offensive to a black congregation, but it was to them. And it's different. And we have to learn that and let people be people. But in the Atlantic Union, it was about to say, a few of those whites have stayed, but blacks have just come on in, especially the Caribbeans. They've come in, and Greater New York is almost all black. New York Conference is almost all black. You go up into Connecticut, and those Rhode Island, you still find some white churches, but a successful merging is where some of those folks stay, and a bunch of us go and we get together and have a meeting of the minds. But that doesn't happen very often.
Appreciate your response. Moving forward, we know that there may be some consideration for future study guides for us to look forward to, so that we might be able to learn more and unify in purpose and objective. What's your final word for us as African Americans, as Adventists?
Simply that we should learn to relax. I think we have good organizations out here. We have good organizations where there are black conferences. We only have 2 unions of the 9, not counting Canada, where there are no black conferences. Those 2 unions are the Pacific Union, and the president who just retired was black. And we do have 1 black amongst the 7 local conferences. That's Northern California. But we should be comfortable with cultural diversity. We should know that it's not mixing, it's fixing that we need to do. And the main fixing we need to do is for Christian education. Yes, we must have social justice. But even beyond that, before that, we need to support our church schools, and it's a crime to see LA Academy or any other academy suffering. We ought to be supporting Pine Forge. We ought to be supporting Oakwood, and know that Christian education, talk about a legacy. If there's any legacy we can leave, it is a legacy of Christian education, where our boys and girls and our young women can learn and grow and associate and marry and leave, and finally, as adults, make for good, fine, supportive Seventh-day Adventist Christian families.
Well said. Thank you so much, Dr. Rock, for your willingness to just spend time with us. Might you share the link? Dr. Pollard has been doing a fine series in February where he went through each week of the study guide If anyone missed it and you didn't have a chance to connect with anyone, he provided one. That's one of many. And Dr. Rock, do you know the name of his program? Dr. Pollard's program?
What is it?
It's Unblock.
Unblock. Thank you, Sharon. I heard you. So if you want to catch something where they are sharing more highlights from the study guide for each week, if you missed any of that, and I'm sure there are others, you can do so by going online to Unblock with Dr. Leslie Pollard. And you're hearing more inspiring discussions that delve into this rich experience that has been provided for us. We really thank Dr. Warren and Dr. Rock for the vision and for those who participated in writing. We'll be able to delve into it once again. And now that you've heard from Dr. Rock this afternoon or evening, wherever you are, you may want to go back and look at that book again, and you may capture new ideas and new thoughts, having heard him share some of his insight today. Viola, I ask that you would pray for our guests this afternoon. Would you mind doing that now?
Excuse me, Debbie. Before the prayer, I just want to mention that what you'll see on YouTube is Unblock on the Oakwood website, but Dr. Pollard's specific segment of that is called Windows on the Word.
Thank you, Mrs. Rock. Windows on the Word. I'm gonna, actually, it's been put in there. Thank you, Lori. And it's a perfect time for me to give a shout out to our co-host this afternoon, Lori Crawford, coming to us from Maryland. Lori has put it in the chat there. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, Mrs. Rock. Windows on the Word. And once again, the host for that program, Dr. Pollard. And it's an ongoing program. During the month of February, as so many did, he focused on the study guide and the rich nuggets that are there from week to week that empowered us and in fact gave us many aha moments for us to reflect on. Thank you. Viola?
Okay, let us pray. Kind Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this beautiful afternoon where we were able to just fellowship and to just listen to words of wisdom from Dr. Rock. I'm asking you, dear Father, in a special way to bless him with health and with continued strength. And thank you so much for his willingness to share with us. I'm asking you to bless his wife, bless his family, dear Father, and provide for them. Thank you so much for this platform, Father, that you have given to us where we can gather together each Sabbath and just fellowship and learn some more of you. As we're about to close this Sabbath and start a new week, I'm asking you to be with each and every one of us and help us to remember that you are in control of every single situation, and soon and very soon you're coming. Thanks again for hearing us, and thanks for answering. In your son's name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us once again. It has been so nice to have this time of fellowship with you. May the Lord bless and keep you and cause his face to shine upon you and grant you and yours peace. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other. For more information about this program, This Is My Story, Testimonies That Move the Soul, see us at our website. We look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.